everyone. Today we're going to talk about the case of Samuel Little, who was an American serial killer and is considered one of the most prolific serial killers. He actually confessed to murdering 93 people, all of whom were women. And let's see a little bit more about Samuel Little. He also went by the names of Samuel McDowell, Mr. Sam, and the Choke and Stroke Killer. And I actually learned a couple of years ago in one of the classes that I took that killers or offenders, nicknames or monikers, sometimes male offenders would be given quote-unquote scarier moniker than female offenders. So in this case, with Mr. Little, the Choke and Stroke Killer, it kind of presents itself in a scarier sense. And a little bit more about him, his early life. He was born on June 7th of 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, which Reynolds, Georgia is a small town about 100 miles south of Atlanta, and it had a population of about 1,253 people based on the census information in that year, the year he was born. And he was born to a mother that he claimed was a prostitute. He said that she was a lady of the night. And his mom's name was Bessie Mae Little. And she was a teenage prostitute who lived with her grandmother the year that Samuel Little was born. And the census that year said that his mom, Bessie Mae, worked as a maid. And authorities believe that Bessie Mae gave birth to Samuel while she was in jail. And then not much was found about his father, except that his father was a 19-year-old whose name was Paul McDowell. And at birth, Samuel's last name was also McDowell. But other than that, there wasn't much information that was found about Samuel Little's father. And also, Samuel said that his mom abandoned him on the side of the road when he was a baby, and he was raised by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio. But there also aren't a lot of other details that are clear about Samuel Little's childhood. So just thinking of the fact that he said that his mom abandoned him on the side of the road when he was a baby, there's questions that arise that if he had abandonment issues, and did he also have resentment towards his mom's lifestyle, which also tied into the offenses that he did and his lifestyle. And also, let's see, he began committing his crimes in his teenage years, starting with theft. So he probably tried to see if he could get away with stealing things. And then once he saw that he could, he also committed other crimes. And one thing that he did while in middle school was got in trouble for stealing a bicycle. And then when that happened, he was sent to a reformatory school for teenage boys at the age of 13, and by the name of Boys Industrial School in Lancaster, Ohio. And then his mom is listed on the booking at that time as whereabouts unknown. So then thinking about for any disciplinary issues that he had, was that based on having an unstable home life? And was the reformatory school a place where he learned negative or positive behavioral strategies? And because people learn from what are called the models in their lives, that could be people such as friends, teachers, siblings. So learning behavioral strategies from others that someone is around. So with him being at the reformatory school, did he come into contact with people who had positive influence on him or a negative influence on him? And that could also go into thinking about nature versus nurture. Was he born with certain characteristics, and then within the environment that he was in, did he also have those influences that escalated those characteristics. And one thing that I also thought about was, did he also maybe have conduct disorder, which by definition, that is a group of behavioral and emotional problems characterized by disregard for others and thinking about the crimes that he committed. He didn't really care about others, if it hurt other people. And children with conduct disorder have a difficult time following the rules and behaving in a socially acceptable way, which again, he had disciplinary actions and he would break the rules, so that breaking the rules would be considered in not a socially acceptable way. And then also those with conduct disorder, sometimes their behavior, it can be hostile and sometimes physically violent. And also certain signs of conduct disorder can include not caring about the social norms of good behavior, ignoring the rights and feelings of other people, and enjoying causing harm, lying, or manipulating people, and then committing physical or sexual violence, hurting animals. And in the case of Samuel Little, he killed 93 people, so he enjoyed harming people, killing them, and just not following the rules and breaking the law. So he definitely had a life of crime. And he also, while he was at the reformatory school, going back to when he was younger, he ended up with 47 disciplinary reports in the years that he was there. So that's a lot. So obviously he didn't like to follow the rules and committed crimes. And then after being thrown into juvenile detention, from then on, his crimes grew worse. So he was escalating his crime from theft to other crimes. Eventually he dropped out of high school, and then by the age of 16, he was drifting around the United States, living a nomadic, transient lifestyle. So he didn't have one set location where I guess he considered home. He was traveling around, and then he was arrested for burglary in Omaha. And then a year after that, he was charged with breaking into a furniture store in Lorain, Ohio, and then shipped to a juvenile detention center for 2 years. So in that case, again, there's questions. Did he not feel ties to his community or a place to belong, since he didn't really have present parents in his life when he was younger? Is that why he drifted? Because he didn't feel like he had a home to go back to, even though he was raised by his grandmother? And then did he feel like he didn't have any friends? Just since he was in the reformatory school while he was younger, did he not have any connections outside of that environment? So after the juvenile detention center for 2 years, from there he was in and out of reform schools and jails for various types of theft throughout his teen years and into his 20s. So that's pretty much, that's during his formative years, and he shows a lack of self-control, lack of moral code to follow the rules and abide by the laws, and just seeing what he could get away with the different crimes that he was committing. And it looks like when he was younger, he had a lot of theft as his main crime that he did. And then starting in the 1950s, he moved around from state to state, and then now he's getting arrested for fraud, driving under the influence, assault, armed robbery, rape, among other crimes. So now has a variety of different crimes that he's committing. And then going back to the conduct disorder, where he is lying, or committing fraud, hurting others, so assaulting others, robbing them, committing rape. So obviously he doesn't care about how he hurts other people. And then he would also shoplift and steal in a city or town to gather the money to buy alcohol and drugs, but never stayed in one place for long. So that might have helped him not get caught just because he didn't stay in one place too long. So he actually would drive from New Jersey to California in a matter of days, and that could be a long drive. So when he had his run-ins with the police, they often just wanted to shoo him out of town. So I guess since he didn't stay in one place from too long, maybe they saw him as a nuisance. And but if an investigation were to have taken place, maybe if there was more technology back then as there is now, they would have been able to build a profile of him and to see that he's actually committing these crimes and he actually needs to be held accountable and not just to shoo him out of town, since he would continue to commit the crimes. And then in addition, sometimes he was locked up for months or even years. Sometimes he beat the charges, winning acquittals on assault with a gun in Miami, and then armed robbery in suburban Cleveland. So even though he did at times get locked up, he also always ended up going back to a life of murder and aimless drifting, supported by shoplifting and the occasional job. So he's not learning his lesson. He's continuing to commit crimes and being a danger to society. And by the time he was released from a stint in Mansfield prison, his mother ended up resurfacing. So at that time, Bessie Mae, his mom, had an address in Miami, and that's where Samuel Little ended up heading there in the late 1960s. And then in Miami, that's where he would kill his first victim, and her name was Mary Brosley, and that was in 1971. And then also, while he was at Mansfield, he learned how to box while he was there, and that ties into his crimes. So there could be a question as far as did his mom resurfacing bring him so much anger that he escalated and killed his first victim just because he had so much anger in him. He was so resentful towards his mom and her lifestyle and feeling abandoned that he just took it out on innocent individuals whom he could control. And again, learning how to box, that can be used as a weapon also against individuals with hurting them. So another interesting fact about Samuel Little was that he learned how to draw during his first prison stay. And then while he was at the prison, he was there for 3 years for robbing the furniture store in Ohio in his 20s. And then drawing, that became his preferred pastime. So Samuel Little, he didn't have his parents really present. It didn't look like he really had many friends. However, he did have one person who was pretty recurrent in his life, and her name was Aurelia Jean Dorsey. She went by the name of Jean, and she actually was his longtime girlfriend. She ended up supporting them through shoplifting. She was considered a shoplifting expert and taught him how to fence stolen goods. She would also follow him in his travels, and he sometimes lived with her in Los Angeles, California. And then at nighttime, after she went to bed, Samuel would go hunt for his victims. So he was in a predatory state, searching for victims, hunting for them, making them his prey. And it was said that Jean, she died of a brain aneurysm in the mid to late 1980s. Samuel Little actually had beaten her in the past, and there's questions whether did he contribute to the brain aneurysm from beating her, because again, he knew how to box. He knew how to hurt people with punching them. She was described as an older woman. He was spotted multiple times with a woman who appeared to be in her 70s. in the southern states. And then, again, did he contribute to her brain aneurysm from beating her in the past? Over time, authorities did not believe that Jean was an accomplice to the murders, although they thought she may have been aware of them because she often cleaned his car, which was often in the location of where Little would kill his victims, and he was accused of beating her as well. So when she was cleaning the car, did she see signs of, for example, blood, hair left over from the victims, or any other signs of the victims within the car? And then, according to the Los Angeles Times, Samuel Little was married once, and then he had two long-term girlfriends who followed him in his cross-country travels. So now it looks like he had a connection with these individuals. And was it a pure connection that he had, or was he actually manipulating them to get what he wanted? But other than Jean, there wasn't much information on if he abused the other individuals that he was in a relationship with. And then it was said that Little allegedly murdered women across 19 states, including California, Texas, and Ohio, for over 35 years, and then ending around 2005. So that was definitely a long life of crime. And going to look at his victims, he actually chose his victims based on how attractive her neck was to him. He said, "A woman got a smooth neck. As a child, I got attracted." And then he never killed anyone he loved and made a conscious effort to not look at their necks. So that was one thing that triggered him. He was attracted to necks. So with Jean and his other long-term girlfriends, he made the conscious effort not to look at their necks. He said he was 7 or 8 years old the first time he got the urge to choke someone. So that's pretty young. And going back to his environment growing up, did he not really have someone to look up to teach him right from wrong? Since he was having those feelings as a child, not a lot of children have those feelings of wanting to hurt someone. And that can go back to the conduct disorder as a child, where someone with that disorder wants to hurt someone, enjoys inflicting pain on others. And then Samuel Little talked about a little girl with red ringlets in his 3rd grade class who stared at him with green eyes and touched her neck. And then he said not even he knew it yet, but somehow sensed it was his weakness, and she taunted him. He told investigators that he got his first erection while watching his kindergarten teacher touch her neck. So that's really young also to experience those feelings. And then by the 5th grade, he was obsessed with a teacher who rubbed her neck in class, and then was fantasizing about killing a little freckled girl he knew. As a teenager, he pinned a photograph from a true crime magazine of a female strangulation victim to his bedroom wall, which that was reported by the Los Angeles Times. So still, as a teenager, he was obsessed with and intrigued by strangulation and wanting to hurt others. So the way he chose his victims, he also chose to kill women who were involved in prostitution and addicted to drugs, those individuals who may be described as vulnerable and marginalized individuals in society. So the people he thought others may not care about or look for if they were missing or dead. And that can happen with other offenders also. They might look at people with whom they can control and then can hurt who others may not care about. So his first kill started with a woman touching her neck, he described her as a big old blonde, which was around about the turn of the new year in 1969 to 1970 in Miami, Florida, in the Coconut Grove area. She was described as a prostitute. She was sitting at a restaurant booth with red leather. He described that as being real nice. He said she crossed them big legs in her fishnet stockings and touched her neck, and he said that was his sign from God. So he had a skewed vision of that being signs from God to hurt people. So his MO or modus operandi, which was the mode or method of his killing, involved him punching his victims out cold. So again, he knew how to box and knew how to hurt others. And then he would strangle them in a way to ensure he left behind no marks. So this could be escalation from his other crimes by going from theft to armed robbery, rape, and then killing individuals. So going back to his nickname that he was given, the choke and stroke killer. So he would strangle his victims to death. He also referred to his victims as succulent fruits he could enjoy without penalty. So due to the lifestyle of the victims, he thought he could do whatever he wanted to them without getting into trouble. He said, "I'd go back to the same city sometimes and pluck me another grape. How many grapes do you all got on the vine here?" He boasted of avoiding people who would be immediately missed. He said, "I'm not going to go over there into the Waite neighborhood and pick out a little teenage girl." So he thought certain populations he would be found out more than others. So he preyed more so on the marginalized society, vulnerable individuals. Samuel Little definitely showed clear signs of a dark, violent streak among his many crimes, including shoplifting, again, fraud, drug solicitation, and then breaking and entering charges. He showed very little mercy for his victims. He took great joy in relating the grisly details. He made his encounters as long and slow as possible, often letting his victims regain consciousness. So he loved being in control, hurting other people, and not caring about killing other people or how they felt. He again believed he was commissioned by God to kill his victims to alleviate their misery, and then at other times he felt that he was possessed by the devil. And many of his victims remain unidentified, and many of their deaths were misclassified in autopsy reports and were attributed to natural causes, drug overdoses, or accidents. And then one of the main reasons Little's murders were undetected for so long, again, was that many of his victims and alleged victims were considered on the quote-unquote fringes of society. For example, sex workers, homeless, drug addicts. And then Samuel Little said, "I never killed no senators or governors or fancy New York journalists, nothing like that," which he told the New York Times. He said he stayed in the ghettos. He said they was broke and homeless, and they walked right into my spider web. So he's thinking they're coming to him. He's a spider getting his prey, and once they're in the spider web, he can attack them and kill them and do whatever he wants. And then again, it was difficult to detect foul play with his method of killing by punching his victims and then strangling them to death, because no bullets or stab wounds made it difficult to detect foul play. And Samuel Little claims he spent his years in prison learning how to box, and that he showed promise as a prize-fighting boxer, a career which he ended up not pursuing. And then he usually would stun his victims with powerful punches, and then he would strangle them. He stated that he strangled all of his victims with the exception of two who were drowned, and then he was adamant he never shot or stabbed them. And investigators say the manner in which Samuel Little killed his victims was more reminiscent to suffocation than strangulation. Um, Several of his victims did not have broken or fractured hyoid bones, which hyoid bones are in the throat. Having the broken or fractured hyoid bones is that's one of strangulation in victims. And you can also have a sign of petechia in your area right here, which that can also be a sign of strangulation. And then some of his victims are, again, the first one, Mary Brosley, whom she was a mother of two from Massachusetts and considered Samuel Little's first victim. It was described by New Year's Day of 1971. She was 33 and had become the first known victim of him. And Samuel Little drove his car to a stop in a secluded area off Route 27 near Miami, and then he cut his engine in his vehicle. And it said, before long, Mary Brosley was in the vehicle and had straddled his lap. She, at that time, started playing with her necklace, which again, he was obsessed with people touching their necks. He had met her at a nearby bar. They were drinking away the final hours of 1970. She was described as being frail, a vulnerable woman, about 5'4", anorexic, barely 80 pounds, so she was very small. She also had the tip of her left pinky finger missing, which was sliced off in a kitchen accident, and she also walked with a limp from hip surgery. And Mary Brosley said she had left a series of lovers and 2 children in Massachusetts after endless confrontations about her drinking. She estranged from her family, struggling to survive. It was said that she was the kind of woman who might disappear without attracting much notice. 6 months before she met Little, she had been reported missing by her family in Massachusetts. And then it would be, unfortunately, 47 years before her family heard anything about her. She had a 7-year-old son named Daryl Brosley, whom she left in Massachusetts in June 1970 without telling anyone that she was leaving. And she was reported missing by her family not long after, who last saw her on June 12th of that year. Her sister, Claire Capolino, told detectives that her sister was a severe alcoholic when they contacted her almost 50 years after her sister went missing. And her sister said on the night before Mary disappeared, police found Mary walking along the highway at night. And Mary told investigators that 2 men had pushed her out of a moving vehicle in Palmer, Massachusetts, which hurt her shoulder. And then the next day, she was supposed to take a bus back to Boston, where she lived with her parents, but Mary never came home. Her sister suspected that she hitched a ride with someone somewhere, which was common for her to do. So who knows how often she was in vehicles with people she didn't know, which could leave her open to becoming a victim, just since she didn't know people and she was getting in the vehicles with them. According to Mary's sister, she said Mary would take rides with anyone who would provide her with alcohol, and then she'd been in and out of hospital with cirrhosis of the liver. What may have tied into her drinking was the pain that she experienced within her relationships, such as her ex-husband would beat her regularly during their marriage, which Mary's sister said physically Mary was sick, but she also endured hip surgery that left her with a limp and a metal plate and screws in her body that were to become part of confirming her identity decades later. And she also had a V-shaped scar on her cheek. Samuel said that he admired the way that the moonlight illuminated Mary's pale throat. He said, I had strong desires to choke her. He would later tell the police. He said he just went out of control. So he, again, is lacking self-control and then committing these crimes. And Mary had been dead for 3 weeks when a man and his 15-year-old son were out hunting one Sunday afternoon, stumbled across a body in a shallow grave. So that would definitely be something scary to see, especially as a young child. They stumbled across it in a shallow grave. It was described that she was in a multicolored dress, had underwear, and then a metal necklace, but she was decayed beyond recognition and then carried no identification. The police did run what remained of her fingerprints, but found no matches at that time. Her body had been decomposing for weeks before it was discovered, which that allowed physical clues to degrade. And by the time they found her, the Miami police weren't even sure that whom they called her Jane Doe at the time, since there was no identity or identification. And at that time, when they found her, the police weren't sure that she had even been murdered. It was said that her blood alcohol level was really high, between 0.9 and 0.37. So they said maybe she simply had dropped dead from the high level of alcohol in her system. The police did deem it as a suspicious death, but hadn't labeled it as a homicide at the time, despite the fact that someone had buried the body. She was still considered a Jane Doe when she officially became a murder victim in 1982, due to dental records helped to identify her. And Joseph Davis, who was the chief medical examiner in Miami, opened her file during a routine review of unsolved cases, which it's really good that there are people who review unsolved cases to see if anything stands out, that they can help to solve those cases, stuff that may be connected to other cases. And with new technology, it can help pinpoint things that may not have been looked at before to help solve different cases. So again, Joseph Davis had opened her file during a routine review of unsolved cases. And then the way Mary Brosley had been partially buried prompted him to reconsider the manner of her death. So at that time, then it was changed from undetermined to homicide. But then 35 more years passed before an investigator with the medical examiner's office, who was a specialist in unidentified remains, picked up the file. And the investigator who did that, her name was Brittany McLaurin. She plugged a description of the body into a national database of missing persons launched about a decade earlier. And McLaurin quickly turned up a report of a missing Massachusetts woman who had lost part of her pinky and had a medical implant in her hip, just like the unidentified body. So the woman, Mary Brosley, was also said to have naturally auburn hair that she occasionally dyed blonde, which was another match. And then McLaurin had contacted the dental expert who compared the body's teeth with Brosley's dental records. Then McLaurin called police to say she had identified their Jane Doe, and it would take another year to find Mary Brosley's killer. And going back to Mary Brosley's son, Daryl, he had long wondered about the mother who vanished when he was a child. It was described that Mary was once a bright student and often endured a long line of violent men. One who had picked her up during a fight and then threw her down so hard she needed surgery. Another was Daryl's father. Daryl remembers watching his dad throw a drinking glass at his mother's head. So she may have used alcohol as a coping mechanism to deal with all of the violence that she had to endure, maybe to ease her pain or to not think about what she had to go through and endure. Daryl said his mother wound up a divorced alcoholic who was forced to give up Daryl and his younger sister to foster care. And maybe if she hadn't had to endure the violence against her from the men that she was in a relationship with, maybe she wouldn't have drank so much. So that was a pattern among Little's confirmed and likely victims. In some cases, the failure to recognize that a murder had been committed led to abbreviated criminal probes. So the investigation may not have been as complete as if it were if they recognized that, if police had recognized them as actual murders. And then another victim of Samuel Little was in South Florida in Miami. Her name was Angela Chapman. She was 25 and was described as a mentally disabled sex worker who had sex with Little. In this case, Samuel Little drove Angela out to the Everglades. He tried to drown her, and then it was said that he took her out of the water after she passed out, and he brought her back to the shore. When she woke back up, he choked her again and then killed her, and she died in 1976. And then in 1982, Samuel Little had been arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, on suspicion of killing Melinda LaPree, who was 22. Two other prostitutes who had been attacked around the same time picked Samuel out of a lineup. However, at that time, a grand jury declined to indict him because of concerns about the credibility of the survivors. So it's just sad that the grand jury didn't believe them just because of their lifestyle. So then he got to roam around freely and commit more crimes. And then in 1983, he was charged in the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount in Gainesville, Florida. The night she died, witnesses saw her getting into the car of a man fitting Little's description. Cops at the time discovered that he was traveling with a 17-year-old boy named Danny Beckless and 69-year-old Jean Dorsey, again his girlfriend. And during the questioning, Jean provided an alibi, but Danny admitted that Little bragged about picking up prostitutes and getting rid of them. When the case went to trial, Danny and Jean ended up skipping town, and Little was acquitted. In January 1984, Little moved to San Diego, where he lived with Jean. And then in October of that year, he was arrested for kidnapping, beating and strangling 22-year-old Lori Barrows, who he had snatched off of the street, then left her for dead in a pile of rubbish. So he's leaving them there as they're just a piece of trash, doing whatever he wanted to them. But she did survive, and then as did Tanya Jackson, who was rescued when cops caught Little as he tried to strangle her in his car. Samuel Little was then tried in April of 1985, but again, the victim's credibility was questioned because they had been involved in sex work. The jury was hung, and prosecutors decided a second trial would be too risky. So instead, they offered Little a plea deal of 2 lesser charges of assault with intent to inflict great bodily injury in exchange for a 4-year jail sentence. And Samuel Little accepted and served just 2.5 years. So then again, he would be out on the street again to prey on other individuals. And then between January 31st and February 1st of 1987 in Los Angeles, California, shortly after getting out of prison and while on parole, Samuel met a female wearing shorts near Central Avenue in Los Angeles, California. He said he went to a drug dealer's house, and the drug dealer or pimp told the female to go ahead and leave with Little. So Little and the female entered a garage at a residence where there was a ledge or shelf around the interior of the garage, which was approximately 5 feet off the ground and made of solid 2x4s. So they both got onto the shelf or ledge. She began playing with her necklace, which that's one of the things that set him off. And then Little strangled her. The woman fought, and they both fell off the shelf onto a wide platform. And then he then strangled her to death while sitting on her back. So him sitting on her back gave him more control. And even strangling someone, that is actually a very big form of control, because you're basically controlling, taking someone's life right out of them and right into your hands. And then in Los Angeles again, in approximately March or April of 1987, while driving his black Thunderbird, he met a female that was, he called a crackhead, at Tam's Hamburger Stand, located at 51st Street and Central Avenue. And the woman lived in the motel next to the hamburger stand. She got into his vehicle, and they drove to a laundromat on Central Avenue, close to downtown. At that time, then he parked near vegetation in the parking lot of the laundromat. They then both climbed into the back seat, and he strangled her until she passed out. After she came to, he strangled her again. He drove until he got to a 7-Eleven type convenience store. He pulled over, he pulled her into the vacant lot next to the convenience store and dragged her to a rail. She became hung up on the rail, and then he left her on the iron pipe rail next to the store. So again, just discarding her and like a piece of trash. And then again in Los Angeles, California, in approximately September or October of 1992, while driving his Cadillac, he met a female again at Tam's Hamburger. He drove with her to his residence and then drove down Central Avenue to Compton in the rain. At that time, he parked behind a store in Compton while there was some type of rioting was going on, and then he strangled her to death. While strangling her, she honked his car horn, and then that got the attention of a male. She did fight for her life before she died. And then in this case, Samuel Little had propped her up in the front seat of his vehicle like she was sleeping, to, I guess, try not to get as much attention, since someone did notice the honking. And then he drove to a closed down loan company or bank branch deeper in Compton. He pulled her out of the car and dragged her to a manicured lawn behind the building, and then just left her lying face down on the manicured lawn behind the building. And another victim, Little described as someone he only knew as Alice, who he murdered in Los Angeles one summer in the early 90s. He said, "I kissed her mouth and then I squeezed her neck. She started shaking her head and was looking desperate. I realized I couldn't stop." The police identified her as Alice Denise Duval, a prostitute who was in her early 40s, and she had been killed on June 10th of 1991, and then her body had been dumped in Long Beach, California. Samuel Little eventually was apprehended on September 5th of 2012, so after a long time of committing crimes. He was apprehended at a Kentucky homeless shelter and then was extradited to California, where he was wanted on narcotics charges. The detectives actually were able to track his Social Security payments, and then that's how they were able to locate him at the homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. Once he was in custody, the Los Angeles Police Department detectives obtained a DNA match to Little on the victims in 3 unsolved homicides from 1987 and 1989 and charged him with 3 counts of murder. So having the DNA, that definitely helped. And back then there wasn't as much with DNA as there is now, so it was harder to have that evidence back then just because it wasn't as available as it is now. So in the 3 counts of murder, in all 3 cases, the woman, he had done his MO again. They had all been beaten and then strangled, their bodies dumped in an alley, a dumpster, and a garage. He asserted his innocence throughout the trial, even though a string of women testifying for the prosecution told of narrowly surviving violent encounters with Little. In the early 1980s, Samuel Little had also been charged with killing women in Mississippi and Florida, but escaped indictment in Mississippi and a conviction in Florida. However, he served time for assaulting a woman in Missouri and for the assault and false imprisonment of a woman in San Diego. And when Los Angeles got the DNA hit on Little, they asked the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, to work up a full background on him. And the FBI then found an alarming pattern of compelling links to many more murders. Samuel Little's span of crimes were confirmed from 1970 to 2005 and possibly 1960 to 2012. He did confess to committing murders between 1970 to 2005. More than 60 of Samuel Little's confessions have been definitively matched to victims through DNA evidence and or extensively corroborated interviews. So it's so good that there's so much more technology now, and then that DNA evidence is used to help identify victims. And police officials do acknowledge that the vast majority of murders attributed to Little would never have been solved without his voluntary confession. He said his final victim died in Tupelo, Mississippi in 2005. Again, a large number of the killings occurred in the 1970s and early 1980s before DNA profiling was a part of the law enforcement toolbox. So they didn't have all the tools back then that could have helped identify the victims. And then after DNA analysis came into play, the victims' work as prostitutes, that also did, it was said to, did complicate the ability of police to gather telling physical evidence. Samuel Little was convicted by 1975. He had been arrested over 25 times across 11 states, so he's a career criminal. In total, he served 10 years for these various offenses and escaped 2 murder convictions before his 2014 conviction. He wasn't convicted of the murders until 2014, when he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But by that time, he was already in his mid-70s. He was convicted in 2014 of the murders of Carol Alford, who was 41, Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, she was 46, and Audrey Nelson Everett, 35, who was 35. And they were beaten and strangled in 1987. Again, their bodies were found in alleyways and in abandoned garages. In 2018, he was convicted for the murder of Denise Christie Brothers in Odessa, Texas in 1994. Her body was found by a Coca-Cola bottling company employee as he was backing up in the empty lot. He actually initially thought the body was a mannequin before taking a closer look. She was found less than a mile from where she had been reported to have been last seen in the parking lot of a hotel on 2nd and West County Road. Sometimes offenders may have what's called an anchor point or a home base within a mile of their offense. So where they live might be within like a mile of their offense. However, when you have someone who's transient and move around a lot, their home base may be all over the place. And Denise was found partially nude and decomposing. However, an autopsy would later reveal that she had been strangled. And then in 2018, Samuel Little did confess to murdering Denise. Texas Ranger Jay Holland conducted several interviews with Little. Samuel Little provided a timeline putting him in Odessa during the time the crime was committed. He had intimate knowledge of the victim that was never released to the public. So that was a sign that definitely keyed in on him as someone who may have committed the offenses. He had 60 confirmed victims and was tested for involvement in 93. At least 68 of Little's victims were African American, 3 were Hispanic, and 1 was Native American. Several had mental disabilities, and then at least 1 was a transgender woman. The FBI's VICAP, again, which is the Violent Crime Apprehension Program, and that's responsible for the analysis of serial violent and sexual crimes. It has confirmed that is the largest number of cases for any serial killer in U.S. history. During Samuel Little's trial, 2 women identified Little as the man who attacked them separately in Mississippi in the 1980s, and that took a lot of courage to confront him in court. The women said they were working as prostitutes when they met Little. They said he punched them and choked them, again, his MO, and then his mode of killing. 1 woman was beaten so badly that blood trickled from her eyes like tears, she told jurors. So he definitely was an evil person, didn't care about others. He enjoyed hurting people. Another woman testified that Little attacked her in September 1984 in San Diego. She said that she had also worked as a prostitute, but not the night a man put his arm around her throat and pulled her into a dark-colored car. The woman said Little tied her up and began choking her. So that's a form of control, with tying her up and choking her. Eventually pushing her out of the vehicle onto a heap of trash. So again, he didn't see them as human beings, but as objects to do whatever he liked, and then discarded them like trash. A month later, Little was arrested in San Diego. Police found an unconscious bleeding woman in his car. He was convicted of false imprisonment and felony assault in the 2 attacks, but again was released after 2.5 years in prison, so he wasn't there for very long. The criminal penalty that he received was 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and then he spent many of his later years in poor health in a wheelchair with diabetes and a heart condition. He actually died on December 30th of 2020, so almost not too long ago, at the age of 80 in Los Angeles, California. And according to Ector County, Texas District Attorney Bobby Bland, he was the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. The Los Angeles Police Department gave him the name the Choke and Stroke Killer, so going back to that moniker or nickname. He was given this because he often masturbated while strangling his victims. And as I stated, strangulation is one of the most controlling forms of killing, because the person is controlling the life and death of another person, and he liked to be in control. There was an interesting fact about Samuel. He had a photographic memory, so he was able to describe where he met his victims and where he killed them, where he left their bodies and what the victims looked like and what car he was driving. He remembered the killings in great detail. However, he lacked the ability to accurately judge time frames and distances, and at times he was proven to be off by more than 10 years and 40 miles. while in prison, he said, I live in my mind now with my babies, his victims, in my drawings. The only things I was ever good at was drawing and fighting. So he was definitely an evil person, and it's definitely good that he's no longer among us within society. And thank you for your time. If you have any suggestions on other cases that you'd like me to take a look at, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments. Stay safe out there. Please subscribe, and then I'll bring you some more cases. And I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.